So what is a perfect square trinomial? Well, perfect squares we know result from squaring something. So in this case, what are we squaring? We're going to be squaring binomials, and that's going to result in a perfect square trinomial. So you guys remember that when we were squaring binomials, what we want to think about instead of just squaring is multiplying x plus 7 by itself. So I like to cross out that 2 and create another x plus 7. And then we're going to distribute. So start by distributing your x. And that gives us x squared plus 7x. And then distribute your 7. And that gives us another 7x plus 49. And then we know we have to combine those like terms. That gives us x squared plus 14x plus 49. So one more time, let's try it again, but this time with a negative. We're just going to cross that out and recognize that we really just have to multiply by itself. We're going to distribute the x and get x squared minus 5x. Then distribute the negative 5, and we'll get another negative 5x and a positive 25. Remember that negative number squared becomes positive. So when we combine these, those don't cancel, right? Negative plus another negative is going to become more negative. So we're going to get x squared minus 10x plus 25, right? And so you might be noticing a pattern here, right? What we see is that we take this number, and that number shows up twice here and ends up doubling to become 14x. And that same number, well, that number gets squared to become our c value. So there's a little bit of a connection between this constant and our b and our c. So we can use that to kind of do a little bit of a shortcut here. And we can say, well, we know that to get out a trinomial, we would square x. This 8 is going to double, right? Just like we see here, 7x plus 7x becoming 14x. This is going to become 16x. And then we also know that 8 is going to square. It becomes 64, right? So this guy we got because we did 8 times 2. And this guy we got because we did 8 squared. Okay? So think about that for a moment, and if you need to pause, you can. And Mrs. Eglio is going to come on in and show us the rest here.
Hi guys, here are a few other examples of perfect square trinomials. So we have x squared plus 8x plus 16, and then we have x squared minus 12x plus 36. So the reason that x squared plus 8x plus 16 is a perfect square trinomial is if we start with our number 8, like Mrs. Nathal just went over, some number times 2 needs to equal 8, and some number squared needs to equal 16. So we think of what number times 2 equals 8, that number would be 4. And then what number squared equals 16, that would also be 4. So since these numbers are the same, this would end up making what Mrs. Nathal showed before, x plus 4 squared. That constant number that she was referring to, that constant here is how we got to x squared plus 8x plus 16. If you did the same thing for the next example, what number times 2 equals negative 12? And what number squared equals 36? Now to get negative 12, we would multiply negative 6. And negative 6 squared can also equal positive 36. So then when we write out our binomial squared, that would be x minus 6 squared. Now to determine if something is a perfect square trinomial, we have to see if they're the result of squaring a certain binomial. So to figure that out, you want to see what number times 2 should equal 24. And then if that same number squared can equal 144. So what number times 2 equals 24? That number is 12. What number squared equals 144? That is also 12. And this results in x plus 12 squared. So this is a perfect square trinomial because we are squaring a binomial to get there. Now if we try the same thing in our second example, what number times 2 equals negative 6? And if that same number squared equals 16. Now we know that negative 3 times 2 equals negative 6. But does negative 3 squared equal 16? It does not. This would actually say that 4 squared equals 16. So since these numbers are not the same, this is not a perfect square trinomial because I cannot square a binomial to get there. Now the last thing we're going to look at is how we can fill in the blanks of these equations to turn them into perfect square trinomials. So we're given our b value here of negative 14. We want to do the same thing from above and figure out what number times 2 equals negative 14. So if we figure that out, the number times 2 would be negative 7. Now we take that same number, negative 7, and we square it. Remember that negative 7 squared means negative 7 times negative 7. So that leaves us with the answer of positive 49. So I'll write that here, equals 49. So this is the number that we would then plug in to create our perfect square trinomial. If we had x squared plus 20x plus blank, figuring out what number times 2 equals 20, that number would be 10. And then if we take 10 and square it, we get 100. And that number is going to end up being our c value. So anytime you're trying to fill in your blank, you are figuring out what number times 2 equals your b value, and then you take that number to square and become your c value. So from here, you can now work on the Google form that is due next.